Guruji now goes on to highlight more spiritual practices. Jor na mangan, den na jor. No power to ask, to give no power. You know, one of the things we might think is that if we're not doing enough Naam Simran in our life, is that because we haven't done a strong enough ardas? We haven't asked for it? So, the ardas or the plea that we've done for Naam Simran hasn't been good enough. So Guruji confirms that to ask for everything or to ask for anything is also not in your power. Because you might think that I can at least do an ardas. That's what I can do. Guru says, Jor na mangan. Even to ask is not in your power. So every time we ask, the very impulse to do the ardas, to make a request, the very impulse that I want to progress further on this path, that impulse comes from the One. If the first step on this path is to have a desire, to walk on this path, to understand more about reality, then that desire itself comes from the One. The desire doesn't come from you. Jor na mangan. Guruji then says, Den na jor. To give, there's no power as well. And what is this path? This path is the path of giving up your self-identity, giving up your ego, surrendering your ego. Guru says this is also not your doing. Guruji has time and time again asked for a head, asked you to give your head. And what Guru means is surrender your ego. Surrender the very idea that I exist. But Guruji says here that you don't have the ability to even make that surrendering. Even that giving is a grace. That's not your control, that's not your power to do so. Even our giving is not our doing. So many times when we see people who say that they are spiritual, who say that they're on a spiritual path, they might say that they are on a path of awakening. And the reason they have these notions about themselves is they think that I'm now very kind, I'm very giving, I'm very loving, I'm compassionate, I'm very forgiving. You might hear people say that in order to be enlightened, you have to give out positive thoughts. That if you give positive thoughts, if you radiate positivity, that the universe will give positivity back to you. Now the question is, if the source of that positivity is me, I am the one giving out positive vibes, then there is no use to that positivity. Because the I am still remains. The I is still there. So what you find with people who've very quickly gone into the spiritual path, not really had the opportunity to learn the depth, the complexity of what it is and what it involves, is what you find is people with a very polished ego. It's still an ego, but it's a very refined, shiny ego. It's a refined sense of self. It's a pure, a pious ego. And this is a danger that we have to be aware of. We may find that we're actually very proud and that we actually quite like the fact that we're on a spiritual path. That we take pride in our spiritual practices and these great commitments that we've made towards realization. We may like the idea that we've left the world behind, we've left all these worldly pleasures, and now we're following a more noble, honorable path, a path towards being awakened, towards being enlightened. And the reason that we have this sense of pride within it is because we've taken a sense of ownership. That, look at me, I'm now on this path. We've taken ownership of our actions and we've identified with the thoughts. We've identified with our actions. And identification with thoughts and actions is the definition of ego. When you identify with any thoughts, any actions, your body, that is what an ego is. It is the I that you've placed on your thoughts, on your actions, on your body. This individualized self. But Guru Nanak Dev Ji doesn't want you to have an ego. Guru Nanak Dev Ji is very protective over you. Guru doesn't want you to have an ego, because the ego is the very opposite of this path. It's walking in the wrong direction. Jor na mangan, den na jor. Jor na jivan, maran hai jor. Guruji goes even further. No power to live, to die, no power. And these are further aspects of the spiritual path. In the spiritual path, we hear that in order to truly live, you have to die. You have to kill the ego. And killing the ego is to give up your ego, to be alive and dead at the same time. This is known as Jivat Mare. We can translate that as living dead. Now, while Hollywood has reserved that term for zombies, the Indian mystics have always used that term for the highest, most enlightened beings. Those who are alive, but they're not alive. Those who are dead, but alive. They are walking, talking, living, breathing, but they are not there. They have disappeared. They don't identify with that which is walking, talking, living and breathing. There's no identity there. That which is walking, talking, living and breathing is known to be a part of the bigger one. They are the living dead. But you only reach this stage when you know that there is nothing here. When you own nothing. When you are nothing. There is nothing that you can call mine. So, you've not had a say in your birth. You didn't have a say when you were born, where you were born, to whom you were born, how you were born, or what your body would look like when it was born. You didn't even choose your own gender. What control do you think you have over anything else? What is this I that you've placed on what? On your body? The body that you didn't create? The body that you had no say over? What is the I that you've placed it upon? So you've had no control over your birth, and you have no control over your death either. Does anyone know when death is going to come and take them? But some of you may ask, but what about suicide? Surely suicide is something that we control. Surely that is something that is in our power to do so. Now, suicide rarely ever happens in isolation without any influence from external factors. Suicide rarely happens without some reason, some external circumstance that leads up to the suicide. Whether they're external circumstances or internal changes in thoughts, in internal circumstances within the victim's own minds, and neither of those circumstances are in the victim's control. Sometimes just life takes a turn for the worse, and the internal can't deal with the changes of the external. Again, who decides whether a mind is going to be able to cope with the stresses of life or not be able to cope? Who decides that? Do you decide that you're going to be in control, or do you decide that you're going to have a nervous breakdown? So you have no control. So even the person who commits suicide doesn't have control over why those circumstances have led to that scenario. So remember that nothing happens outside of divine will. Nothing happens outside of divine will. Hukme andar sab ko, bahar hukm na koe. So this is just a divine long story being written. It's a continuous story that is being told. Jor na Raj Mal Mansur. Jor na Raj. Raj here has a sihari, and that means to be in something. A noun with a sihari at the last letter means within Raj. So no control to rule, to be in a position to rule, or to be in wealth, mal. No power to rule or to be wealthy. Man shor. The word shor means shor, noise within the mind. Again, mind has a sihari, which means within the mind. No power to rule or to be wealthy, for which there is constant noise in the mind. So Guru here is saying that even success and wealth, both things that the mind is always craving, these are the things that are constantly occupying our mind. This is what motivates us. This is what gets us out of bed in the mornings. Although everyone wants these things, not everyone can have these things. Not everyone achieves all the success that the mind desires. So this is also not in our control. We see that some people work very hard and achieve no success in the material world, and some people do very little and success just falls onto them. Some people are rich and just lucky. And if we think about it, if everyone is craving for success, then we would be in a very difficult position if everybody was successful. How can everyone be successful? In fact, the very idea of success requires the failure of something else. If I'm successful, it's because I'm more successful than my peers. So success requires failures of others. So Guruji is saying that no matter how much you plan or you strategize within the mind, this man shor, you cannot control whether you become successful, wealthy, have a position of power. So even to be a king isn't something that you control. You may just be born into royalty or into celebrity or into a lot of wealth. Where was your control? Where was your power? So Guruji is making all the aspects of our life clear that we don't have control over these things. Jor na Raj Mal Mansur. Jor na Surti Gyan Vichar. No power to be in awareness, in wisdom, or in contemplation. So if material wealth and material success is not in our control, then spiritual success seems like something that is completely unreachable. And again, we need to think about it. If spiritual success is something that was in our control, if we had the control to completely understand this wisdom of non-duality, we would all choose to be enlightened right now. Wouldn't we? We'd all want to be enlightened right now. So, even to understand and access and process this wisdom is not in our control. We can even hear this wisdom, we can read about this wisdom, we can read all the books, but sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. Who controls that? Sometimes we can digest this, sometimes we can take it into our lives, and sometimes we just forget everything that we've understood. We don't have the control to decide whether or not we're going to grasp these concepts. So we cannot say that we can control how this wisdom is going to infiltrate our thoughts and whether it will allow us to comprehend this wisdom or whether we can act upon this wisdom. We don't have control over this. So Guruji is saying, in this surti, in this awakening, in this gyan, to be in this wisdom, and to be in contemplation of this wisdom, vichar, we have no control. Jor na jugti chote sansar. No power of technique to liberate the world. Jodna jukti. Jukti means technique. We heard about Jog Jugat Tanped. Suniye Jog Jugat Tanped. Jugat means jukti, technique. So Guruji says that we can hear about the techniques, but we don't have the power to manifest those techniques, to control those techniques. Something to note about the spelling here. The word sansar has an onkar underneath it, making it a noun, a complete noun. And some people and some translations you will see will say no power to take the technique to be liberated from the world. To liberate from the world. In Punjabi we will say sansar to, from the world. But whenever we take a word like from and add it to a noun, sansar to, then Gurbani will take the onkar away from the word sansar. So here we cannot translate it as the technique to be liberated from the world. Because if we were to say that, we're saying sansar to, from the world, and Gurbani takes away the onkar when it uses to, or when it replaces the word to. When it takes that from word away from the sentence, it will indicate that by taking the onkar away. We would say that this is a mukta word. So we have to translate this as the world, not from the world. So chute sansar means to liberate the world. So what do we mean by that? We have no power to perform that technique which can liberate the whole world, which can liberate everyone in the world. And the technique is the same for the whole world. The technique that we're talking about is to surrender your self-identity. Guruji says that you don't have the power to perform that technique. The same technique that is for everyone to be liberated.